More than 75% of parents agree teens under 16 shouldn't be able to download apps from app stores without parental permission. Instagram wants to work with Congress to pass federal legislation that gets it done. Learn more at instagram.com/parental approval.
The friendship is sharing deal.
Because I want one of your McNuggets.
And I need some of your Quarter Pounder.
There's a deal for everyone at McDonald's. Get one favorite like 10-piece chicken McNuggets, a Quarter Pounder, or a Big Mac and get another for just $1. Price and participation may vary. Valid for item of equal or lesser value.
To get the Crime Writers on Aftershow right now, go to patreon.com/partners in crime media.
I'm Rebecca Lavoie, and this is Crime Writers On. Crime Writers On is the original true crime review podcast that digs into true crime, pop culture, other podcasts. And on this episode, as an investigative journalist targets a powerful Hollywood producer accused of preying on actresses, the producer targets him back. Ronan Farrow takes us inside his expose of Harvey Weinstein in the classic podcast Catch and Kill. Joining me to get that done and more is true crime author, TV journalist, and host of the These Are Their Stories podcast, my husband and the love of my life, Kevin Flynn. Hello, Kevin.
Hello, Rebecca.
All right, Kevin, this is obviously a Crime Writers On Classic Rewind.
Classic.
What is coming up on next?
The only thing we're missing is the rewind noise.
All right, so what is coming up on next Monday's brand new shiny episode of Crime Writers On?
Hey, we're going to be talking about a podcast from Texas Monthly, and these are the folks that brought us Tom Brown's Body.
Yes.
And this podcast is called Stephenville.
Yes, more casually known as Steveville.
You ruined my joke that everyone's going to hear on Monday.
Listen. It was a good joke. I ganked it.
You ganked it.
I ganked it. All right. So what are we hearing in today's Crime Writers On Classic Rewind?
Yeah, we're going back to December 16th, 2019.
Yeah.
And we're talking about our review of Catch and Kill.
Wow.
Remember, this started off as a TV expose that got tanked and became a magazine article,
yes,
which became a book,
yes,
which became a podcast,
yes,
which became a TV show about the podcast,
yes,
which I think he has squeezed all the juice from this orange.
Yes, he has. And
yeah.
Obviously, there's other reporters at the New York Times who also did competing reporting, and there's another movie about that, a scripted movie about that. There's a lot to this Weinstein story, which basically kicked off the Me Too movement, essentially. Right. I will say the one thing I remember about this podcast, and I'm curious to know if I talked about it or not, did I, is how it sounded, because I remember it being produced with like a singular sound. This was a Pineapple podcast, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to listening to this rewind.
All right, how about we do the rewind noise and then we'll get into it.
Okay.
They asked me, Ambra, could you do something for us? And I said, yeah, absolutely. And they said, would you want to meet them tomorrow and wear a wire?
Ronan Farrow's reporting on Harvey Weinstein shook Hollywood and contributed to a cultural shift around sexual harassment and assault among men often shielded by their powerful positions. Now Farrow's giving us a behind-the-scenes take on his reporting in Catch and Kill, a podcast based on his best-selling book of the same name. The podcast, produced by Pineapple Street Media, kicks off with the story of a double agent, a private eye tasked with surveilling Farrow, but who instead reveals a massive effort to discourage and discredit his reporting.
There are whistleblowers and journalists and spies, literal spies.
On the last day when we have to follow you, I get a call early. He said that he's going to do the geolocation thing with the phone.
Using audio meant to memorialize his struggles, Farrow recounts in real time how executives at NBC News and NBC Universal slow-walked his expose on Weinstein's rape of actresses and cover-up efforts, while all the time communicating with Weinstein about the story.
The story of what unfolded at NBC is a case study in the power of news organizations to safeguard the truth, and in how devastating the consequences can be when they do the opposite. And nobody had a clearer view of that drama or was placed in a more difficult position because of it than Rich McHugh.
As I said, man, we're either going to get this on the air or probably get fired.
Yep.
Catch and Kill is part crime investigation, part journalism procedural. It's an inside look at one of the most important stories of the decade, giving casual news consumers a deeper dive into the downfall of one of the entertainment industry's most powerful men. Now, we will be talking about plot points for Catch and Kill, the podcast. So to stay spoiler-free, skip ahead to the time code in our show notes for our thumbs up or thumbs down review. Now, am I the only person on this panel who has actually listened to the full audiobook of Ronan Farrow's Catch and Kill or read the book of Ronan Farrow's Catch and Kill?
I think you are.
Okay. So could I just start the discussion then? Normally I'd ask a question, but I'm just going to tell you a thought and then I will ask a question.
Rebecca, what are your thoughts?
When I heard this podcast was being made, I first of all was psyched it was being made by Pineapple Street because all of their productions have been great. Missing Richard Simmons, Running from Cops, The Clearing. So excited about that. But I also found myself wondering, what could a podcast based on a full book be other than just a recounting of the book, a copy of the book? And I got to tell you, I am thrilled with this podcast. I think it is masterfully crafted to be an excellent standalone and an excellent supplement to the book. So now you guys know that. Do not be discouraged from listening to the audiobook or reading the book because you'll learn more from both that you can't get from either one. But I do want to start where the podcast starts because one of the most interesting stories that happens in the book actually happens much later in the book. It's revealed that Igor Ostrovsky is a private eye who has been tasked with following Ronan Farrow around during his reporting. And he now becomes an interview subject for this podcast and is cooperating with Ronan Farrow in his reporting. Kevin, what did you think about the way they kicked this off?
Yeah, I mean, I think we know that this podcast is going to be primarily about Weinstein. It will probably also touch on the other big catch and kill stories that are out there, National Enquirer and whatnot. But I think it was really smart to start with this part of the overall story because it does change up what we're expecting while still giving us a piece of the overall story, but not getting right into all of the misconduct allegations right away. It plants a flag saying it's going to be a broad look at what happened around these stories and around the reporting of these stories.
Laura, as a former private investigator, what did you think of Igor Ostrovsky and his decision that what he was being tasked to do when he realized he was following a journalist around, like he just couldn't do it, and his decision to become a turncoat and cooperate with Farrow?
Well, I loved it, but I have to say, I mean, this, just to clarify, that was not the type of investigating I did. Like, it wasn't as glamorous as hiding in bushes and spying on people, which I would have loved to do because that's something I love to spy on.
Wait. Did you have a public bathroom trick, though, when you were doing your work? Did you figure out, like, that you could use a public bathroom by going into a nice restaurant, ordering a drink, or you asking for a menu and then going to wash your hands?
What are your drink specials, and where can I wash my hands?
I didn't have to do any of that stuff. So my life was not as glamorous as his, but I liked listening to this because I was, first of all, the fact that this guy was like, I know they're paying me, but this just doesn't seem right. But for me, it was like, also, it kicked right off from the beginning that this was just not an ordinary reporting assignment, that it was to the level that it felt dangerous. And it felt like there was a lot of risk in continuing to investigate and continuing to follow leads in this case. I just loved that it's like you see people who are doing the right thing in this story. And we see it later on, even in the third episode that we're going to talk about later, somebody that did something and decided to speak up and speak their conscience instead of doing, what they had agreed to do.
Toby, what do you think of the organizing principle of this podcast? They're taking one facet of his reporting with one character, Igor Ostrovsky in the first episode, his producer, Rich McHugh, in the second episode, and Ambra Gutierrez in the third episode. What do you think of the way they're putting this together instead of as one narrative as the book, sort of portrayed?
Yeah, I was kind of thinking about that as to why they did that. In some ways, it's good in that they all seem like kind of standalones and, they're all tight. You're not kind of bouncing around to different facets of the story. Unlike Kevin, I wasn't super clear as to why they started off with the PI story because there's no real context for any of it, I mean, it's sort of like, oh, that's weird. And then you find out later why this happened. And I also think they probably were looking at the amount of other stuff they have out on essentially the same story between all the reporting that was done in the New Yorker, which I have read, and then the book. So it's how do we continue to tell this story in a way that's not going to seem redundant for people who've consumed the other stuff. So, I think it's clever. I think it works, but it's different. And I'll be interested to see how the whole thing kind of plays out, because you do have these things where, there are things that happen in episode 2 and episode 3 that are happening concurrently, and they kind of have to reference back to them. And you have to kind of get set in your mind, okay, this is happening at this time. But, I think so far so good. I think they've got a pretty good handle on it.
I want to talk about Ronan Farrow as a character in contemporary journalism. I cannot remember a time in my lifetime, really, when a reporter would come out with a story and we'd hear a reporter by name. Ronan Farrow is dropping something tomorrow. Ronan Farrow is reporting something tomorrow. I can't think of a single reporter, either on print or TV, in my lifetime who has achieved the level of kind of anticipation around his work. And I wonder why. There's been, obviously, Megan Twohey and her partner at the New York Times did a lot of the same reporting. Their book, she said, is also fantastic. And there's a lot of not just this reporting, but other big stories happening in the world right now. Ronan Farrow is a star in journalism. And I think it's because he's kind of an odd guy and really leans into that. What do you think, Kevin?
Well, this story really catapulted him into that sphere because, when he was on MSNBC and like the Today Show, he was considered a lightweight.
Yeah.
He's doing Jeff Rawson type investigation on the investigative unit, and he's doing nail salons and, stuff that's not really hard hitting. And he's like, oh, he's a celebrity's kid. He's Jenna Hager Bush.
Yeah.
Right. But
he's
with
a
a tie.
wunderkind, a child genius.
Right.
Yeah.
But all the time, regardless of what assignments he got, we see what a hard-nosed journalist he was. And I think in part NBC's reluctance to put the story on the air, their efforts to kill it, made him a legend within the story. Because by the time it got to the New Yorker, everybody's like, wow, not only is this a really great story, but extra textually, why didn't NBC run this story?
Right.
And he doesn't use the book or the podcast to really flex on NBC.
Oh, he does, though.
But no.
The book? He does.
Oh, okay.
The book is like half about that.
No. He talks about it, right? Mm-hmm. But he doesn't, at least from what I've heard on the podcast, and I didn't really read the book, but I did hear excerpts from the audiobook. They're not cheap shots.
No.
And he's not being snooty about, oh, what a horrible decision those people made. And, he's not calling names, right? Mm. He's naming names. Yeah. Calling names is different.
Right.
He has every right to stomp on their grave, but he's not.
One thing that I really loved about the book and love about this is he says over and over and over again in the book that he wanted to keep his job in TV. He liked working in TV. He liked the idea of being a star TV reporter, but they wouldn't let him do real journalism, and they were stifling this story, which he knew was a story, but he always secretly hoped they would come around, which is why he gave them so much time to kill it. Like, he didn't walk away with it initially. Like, he kept trying and trying and trying. So he admits that. In this podcast, there's one moment where he just talks about, and when I said he's kind of a weird guy, he talks about his own personality and that he's...
Small hands?
No, he does not talk about his tiny hands.
Okay.
I liked that part, yeah.
But he does talk about how he won't stop working and he won't stop texting. I just want to play that clip.
If I'm being honest, I was like, I'm not sure I'm going to like this guy. You asked me to be honest.
I did.
I just remember you were texting all the time. Like, what is this right? Is that what are we doing? And I was like, I hadn't been used to that level of hands-on. And
I'm sure that the producers working on this podcast who have any experience of me so far are laughing at this, because my work style is very much like I am so invested in every aspect of it and very controlling, and I love to be collaborative and bring in other people, but I also demand a lot of involvement.
If I responded to one text, yes, you'd send me 17 more texts okay, now that you're listening, okay, I'm like, oh my God.
Yeah. Thanks for putting up with that. Literally everyone I've ever worked with.
So the other thing we find out is that he and his producer, Rich McHugh, and I believe Ronan Farrow does this with more than just his producer, and I have reasons for believing that, taped all of their conversations about reporting the story. I'm going to play that clip right now.
I think if they know that it's a long way out, then they'll probably just try and go above us and try and kill it in some capacity.
Right.
He's just going to go to somebody else, not you. You know, some honcho way above us. He's just going to try to find ways to sabotage it.
I know, which he's going to probably do anyway. Shit.
I don't know. This is a confusing one.
Laura, what did you think of that? They have all of this tape of he and Rich McHugh in real time discussing what's happening with their story and what NBC is doing with it.
I thought this was awesome. I loved that we were getting this really behind the scenes window into the reporting, and just the level of reporting and the level of, pushing to get this story was just amazing. But hearing it as it was unfolding really kind of took you along for the ride in terms of what it was like. And, I think if you're going into this and you don't know how this ends up, this could be like some serious rage-inducing, stroke-inducing stuff to listen to, because some of it is just so maddening when they're getting shut down. But knowing that in the end, the story's going to come out, the New Yorker's going to publish it, there's going to be a book, it's going to start a movement. You can listen to this with sort of, I don't want to know if vindication is the right word, but like listening to this reporting that's going on, that they're documenting, knowing that this is going to pay off. And wow. So it was, I loved listening to it.
So I've got a question.
Yeah.
I don't know if he gets into this in the book, but I thought one of the interesting things is so you have this guy who clearly is a very smart and dogged journalist, but what's also kind of unique about him is that he's comfortable in sort of the celebrity culture, I guess, just given who his parents are. And so I don't know if he's at all reflects on the fact that in some ways his upbringing, and I don't mean like the style of his parents, because that seems a little weird.
Does it?
Just a little bit. But just the world in which he grew up in gave him, like he talks about how, I only met Harvey once at a cocktail party or something. Gives him a sort of entree and also understanding of that world that I don't think there's any other sort of substantive reporter working who would have that.
You're right. And he does talk about that in the book. He talks about the fact that celebrity, he would contact them on Twitter through instant message because they'd be following each other. And he knew that his celebrity helped with that. Like that would be sometimes his entree. And he's very, it's funny because he talks about his parents, and by the way, he does refer to Woody Allen as his father in the book, but he also makes reference to the pervasive and, let's face it, very likely true rumor that Frank Sinatra is actually his father in the book. There's like one line
just
about it.
Just because they look exactly alike?
That's all.
There's like one line about it that's actually quite funny.
When he sings karaoke.
He addresses it in a very funny way. But yeah, he does talk about that being, and he knows, he's like, the one thing that I really appreciate is he A, acknowledges he's a pain in the ass, B, acknowledges that he secretly still wanted to work in TV even though he knew it was wrong, and C, acknowledges his privilege over and over and over again. And he acknowledges that he wasn't the only one doing this reporting. He talks about the reporting of the New York Times team. His goal was to get the story out. He was not thinking like, I have to beat them. He just wanted to get his reporting out.
I was thinking about those real-time recordings of the phone calls of the him and his producer talking to one another. We hear an awful lot in podcasts, this performative trope of, okay, let's come into the studio and I am going to tell you as the reporter what I found out. Let me tell you about my dad at journalism. Or in Bundyville, The Remnant, like, guys, come here, let me show you what I did with these photographs. But it's still performative. These recordings are done without the intention of being part of a podcast or with the idea that they're ever going to see the light of day.
Right.
They're just more like files and notes and memos, which makes it really interesting. And I think adds not only just this layer of authenticity, but you're more into the narrative because, bam, you get just dropped right in the middle of it.
Right. I mean, I think that Ronan Farrow talks in the book, and I'm sure he'll get into it more in the podcast, about his quotes, and this is in the foreword. A lot of things are quoted verbatim in the book, and the question that he raises in the foreword is people ask me, like, how do I know? Like, how do I have this quote, whatever? And he said, all I can tell you is this reporting went through the same vetting as my New Yorker reporting. The quotes are authentic. I can't always tell you how I'm paraphrasing. I can't always tell you how I got them, whatever. I actually believe he records a lot of material or is in the habit of, I don't think he does it subversively. I don't think he does it illegally. New York is a one-party consent state. But I do think recording is one of the way that he takes notes. That's like his very thorough way of documenting stuff, like logging everything. I don't think he secretly recorded sources, but I do think he has aptitude for recording, as evidenced by his interaction with Ambra Gutierrez.
For weeks, I pressed Ambra to give me the audio.
I would have wanted to give you those recordings, and of course, I didn't want to make trace of where it was coming from.
And then I said, well, what if we just
record the recording?
Record the recording. And it allowed me to say, she never transferred any files to me.
Of course. That's the truth.
Lara Bricker, we need to talk about this. Ambra Gutierrez was a Harvey Weinstein assault victim who made a report to the police. I should say alleged, probably, right? But I probably shouldn't because there's actually tape of it. Anyway.
She took $1 million. They gave her $1 million.
That's true.
I mean,
she reported her assault to the police. They set her up to do a sting. They gave her a wire. Harvey Weinstein essentially confessed on the tape. She, ended up having to settle. We hear what everything happens in the podcast. Ultimately, she agrees to be a source for the book, and it turns out, despite the fact that she had to give up all of her devices and all of her stuff, she had retained a secret recording of the wire that she recorded herself.
Yes.
And then Ronan Farrow recorded her recording. What did you think about all this, Lara Bricker?
I loved it. I was like, yes. I was like, she is awesome. I was like, she's totally awesome. Because as you're listening to this, I was getting so angry in the beginning of that episode, listening to how, everything was totally being turned on her. She wasn't being believed. They're trying to be like, oh, you're a prostitute in Italy or whatever. I'm like, fuck this. And then when she takes the money, I'm like, no, don't do it. But when this came out and she goes to this, well, they asked for all my passwords, but I had all these other emails. So I forwarded everything to myself, pretended I didn't know the password, downloaded it to a friend's computer. I was like, oh, this is awesome. And then how they got around like the NDA by having her not give the recording to Ronan, but play the recording so that I was like, good for her. So I that was definitely sort of a very good episode at the end to kind of be like, yes, power to the people and to, wow, good for her.
What's Italian for password 123?
How did you know my password? No, I'm just kidding.
Toby, what did you think of that section? I mean, it's like suspenseful in that it happened, but I think that she's a really good storyteller, and their interaction with each other, it's like a two-way is very often a very boring way to tell a story. But their interaction with each other, to me, even though I kind of like knew what happened already, like, the sort of way that they build the conversation in the podcast, but then hearing what she actually did. What did you think of that section, and what do you think of Ambra Gutierrez, Toby?
I thought what was interesting about their conversation is it is kind of like they were doing this thing together. So they're sort of recalling this crazy thing they did together and how it worked out. So I thought that dynamic was cool. I can't remember. It might have been even in the comments on our Facebook pages. Somebody had said that, Ronan Farrow's so brave. So he said, well, he's really good at getting other people to do brave things. Not that he's not brave, because clearly in keeping with journalists who usually aren't on the entertainment beat, I mean, what he was doing was dangerous. I mean, he had people following him, and, I think he had reason to be scared. But especially in this particular case, like, he manages to get her to do things that really kind of put her in jeopardy. But clearly she's brave. And, resourceful. When she loses the signal, what is she in the elevator going up to the penthouse? It's like, hey, how the hell does that happen? Like, I don't know, how is your equipment that bad?
It's an elevator.
Yeah.
I mean, honestly.
Surrounded by concrete.
Exactly.
It happens. Yeah.
Okay, I just sort of assumed that you must be able to pay for something. Anyway.
No, Black Cube can pay for it, not the NYPD. Kevin, what do you think about dancing on the grave of the news outlet that killed what ended up being the biggest story of your career and catapulted you into stardom in your own right?
Well, I said this before. I think that he handles it very well. because he could be very snide about it. And I haven't read the book, so I don't know what the tone of it is. But he reports on that.
It tells you what happened.
In an objective sounding way. Doesn't sound like he's embellishing or making unnecessary digs. We are certainly left to make the inference that they were wrong, that there wasn't enough to go over the story. And he backs it up with saying, there were phone calls and emails and whatnot. And I don't know if this was in the book or whether this was just you and I talking, but certainly it seems like perhaps the leverage that Weinstein had over NBC wasn't just, we have all these deals we want to do with Universal, but that he knew something about Matt Lauer.
I think that's implied.
Because it all crashed at the same time.
Yeah, it's implied. And it's because Weinstein had the relationship with the National Enquirer dude. And the Enquirer has dirt on everyone. That becomes very clear. There's a whole section of the book about that dude and the vault. And
I hope we get to that.
The Trump files and the files on all kinds of celebrities. That's where the name Catch and Kill comes from, is the National Enquirer's habit of killing these kinds of stories, like the Stormy Daniels story and so forth. And the Matt Lauer story was one that apparently had been caught and killed over and over and over again. And then obviously NBC knew about Matt Lauer's misconduct because there had been complaints and there had been separations, some quotey quotes with money attached. But yeah, I don't think it's a coincidence personally that Matt Lauer was fired so soon after this story broke. Toby, one quick question for you before we wrap. There is an interesting thing here. I mean, obviously we hear that Weinstein himself was on the phone with the corporate masters at NBC and NBC News, and they were giving him information and he was giving them information, which is bananas.
And he was sending them alcohol as presents?
Grey Goose. Yes. Which you think, I mean, that's just liquor you can buy at the liquor store. It's not like super fancy, right?
Yeah.
Anyway, but the sort of the idea of exploring that relationship between the corporate overlords and a news division. Do you think that's something that you'd like to hear more about in a podcast like this, Toby?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think it's sort of a pervasive problem, but this is one of the more clear-cut examples of the corporation telling the news division, don't do this. And if breaking news was the only thing that you were worried about, like there's no question you would run with this story. Again, I think it's a pervasive problem in, certainly television news because they're all these networks are owned by bigger companies. And, I think it's been a case in print journalism as well.
So on that note, support your local public radio station. Support your local
Exactly.
ProPublica outlet. Support nonprofit news, honestly. The Texas Tribune, ProPublica, your local radio station, New Hampshire Public Radio, whatever your local outlet is, support it. Because we don't do this shit in public media. We just don't. All right. Well, let's do what we do. Let's go around the horn and let our listeners know. Do you give a thumbs up or thumbs down to Catch and Kill, the podcast from Pineapple Street Media, the companion project to Ronan Farrow's book, Catch and Kill? Laura Bricker, I'm going to start with you. What do you think?
I'm going thumbs up. I haven't read the book, and so I was kind of going into this a little bit blind, but I don't think it matters if you've read the book or not, because this is just a really interesting behind-the-scenes look at how this story was reported and what went into bringing the story of Harvey Weinstein out. And just there's some really badass people in this that pushed pretty hard, and I love some of the characters, so I would say thumbs up.
What about you, Toby Ball? Thumbs up or thumbs down for Catch and Kill, the podcast?
Yeah, I'll give it a thumbs up. I was going to give it a thumbs up, but I think after our conversation, I think I feel better about it. I'm not
sold.
Well, I kind of came in as being like, it's entertaining. It's really well done. But it also seemed like the third in a line of things that's coming out from this one story, right? So that it's not the premier way that you would give this information, because you've already done this reporting, you've done a book, and now you're doing a podcast. So it's like everything's kind of trickling down to this, and you're trying to figure out how to make it work. That being said, it's certainly an interesting enough story. He's good enough, and I think the concept for how they're doing it is strong enough that they make it work. The deep dives doing Catch and Kill, in April, I think. So I'll be looking forward to that.
Yeah.
Oh, maybe I'll sign up for that one.
I love this podcast. I had relatively low expectations, even though I know the people making it are great podcast makers, because I figured, what else am I going to learn or get from it, having completely devoured and loved the book so much. But I do think it's kind of brilliant because the book is really about reporting the story. It's about the story, but it's more about reporting the story. And the podcast is about reporting the story. Like, it's incredible. It's a layer of meta that's going even deeper. His interview with Rich McHugh to me really stands out because, you know, he talks about the Rich McHugh stuff in the book, but in this we hear Rich McHugh talk about him. You know, I thought you were annoying. Like, I think they put us together because they wanted us both to quit, you know? And to me, it's like, it's fascinating to get sort of that look into reporting. To me, it's like the journalism story, some of the best media that's ever been made, in my opinion, like All the President's Men, for instance, is about reporters trying to get at the truth. And that's what this is. And I just love it. I think it's a great podcast. What about you, Kevin?
Well, I'm a big thumbs up. A thumb that's bigger than Ronan Farrow's whole hand.
Oh, so mean.
Sorry, Ronan.
He does have very tiny hands.
He does have tiny hands.
It's so cute that you think he's listening to this right
now. Look, it's true that he has squeezed just about all the juice out of this tangerine, but it is really good stuff.
It's a good tangerine.
It's a good tangerine. It's a big, okay, it's a grapefruit, whatever. Yeah, I mean, it's good stuff. I keep thinking, like, this is going to make a fantastic movie like All the President's Men or The Insider. Then I keep thinking, man, like a studio is probably not going to do this because none of them have executives staffed with all saints and angels, and somebody is going to get accused of something, and you know, they're going to stay away from it because, you know, it is about bad behavior. I mean, not just bad behavior, criminal behavior.
Can I just ask you a question?
Yeah.
If you got a message at work that Ronan Farrow was trying to reach you on the phone, wouldn't you be scared completely shitless?
Well, I think it depends on what you assume.
That's true.
I would not assume he was coming after me about an allegation in my past.
No.
I'm sure he probably wants to call me up and yell at me for my small hands jokes. But look, it's a great, great podcast. I am going to stay subscribed. I want to listen to all that he has to do. And, you know, where it separates from the book is that we actually hear from those people.
Right.
We don't have to hear him doing a Ukrainian accent.
That's true.
I mean, you love the accents in the audiobook.
I have mixed feelings about the accents in the audiobook, but I came to enjoy them over. I just realized he had to do it. That's Ronan Farrow. He leans into his weirdness. I love it.
Yeah, it's a classic podcast looking at a very important story.
More than 75% of parents agree teens under 16 shouldn't be able to download apps from app stores without parental permission. Instagram wants to work with Congress to pass federal legislation that gets it done. Learn more at instagram.com/parental approval.
The friendship is sharing deal.
Because I want one of your McNuggets. And I need some of your Quarter Pounders.
There's a deal for everyone at McDonald's. Get one favorite like 10-piece chicken McNuggets, a Quarter Pounder, or a Big Mac and get another for just $1. Price and participation may vary. Valid for item of equal or lesser value.
Shopify is the global commerce platform that helps you sell at every stage of your business. With the internet's best converting checkout, 36% better on average compared to other leading commerce platforms, Shopify helps you turn browsers into buyers. In fact, Shopify powers 10% of all e-commerce in the U.S. Sign up for a $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/podcast free. All lowercase, shopify.com/podcast free, shopify.com/podcast free.
Wow. So, Kevin, Ronan.
We haven't really heard anything in the podcast world from Ronan since, have we?
My suspicion is that Ronan might be working on something. Who knows? But I think maybe...
I think it's Catch and Kill the musical.
I think one of the things that Ronan has maybe learned is that when he's working on something, he should lay low. Because those black cube people do not forget easily or forgive.
They do not.
Yeah. So, yeah, it was an interesting rewind. And I think I did, in fact, talk about the way this podcast sounds.
Yep. Okay, so let's be sure to tune in to Crime Writers On Monday. We're talking about Stephenville.
All right, that does it for us. This show was recorded in the Treehouse Yoga Studio above the Mockingbird Cafe in Bay St. Louis, Mississippi studio, otherwise known as Studio C, The Closet, in our New Hampshire basement, where we also throw lots of shade at the National Broadcasting Corporation.
NBC.
On behalf of all the crime writers, except for you, Keith Morrison and Josh Mankiewicz, thanks for listening. We will catch you later.
The friendship is sharing deal. Because I want one of your McNuggets.
And I need some of your Quarter Pounder.
There's a deal for everyone at McDonald's. Get one favorite like 10-piece chicken McNuggets, a Quarter Pounder, or a Big Mac and get another for just $1. Price and participation may vary. Valid for item of equal or lesser value.